Hello, my name is Russell Myers, independent for U.S. President for 2024. So, before I get started on this, I understand completely that Americans have heard so many candidates and elected officials talking about their dedication to democracy, and we all know how that has turned out. And not well, not for us. All right, so this is one of several areas where my policies are still developing. However, there are several key policies on which my stance will not change, and I am dedicated to these proposals. Each one is intended to expand voting access and citizen voices. First and foremost, I would push strenuously for federal funding of all federal campaigns. Note that I say campaigns, not elections. Some alleged progressives have introduced federal funding for all elections, but that does not mean campaigns. This is intentionally deceptive. My proposal would include equal funding for at least the top 4 major parties, not 2. This would mean no private donations allowed in any way. This would allow a more equal chance for candidates who are not wealthy to run for office. Currently, over 90% of Congress is in the millionaire bracket. They have no understanding of the needs and concerns of the average American. I know many people will complain that this would increase taxes. If that is true, the increase would be determined by the budget set for campaigns. Chances are any such increase would come to maybe 0.01%. That's 1 cent for every $100 in taxes paid, not even $100 per, not even 1 cent for every $100 earned. 1 cent on every $100 in taxes paid. So I think that's very much worth it. All right. The fact is that you currently, personally, pay for corporate campaign donations. You pay higher prices so that corporations can make donations to political campaigns. In addition, some of my other policy proposals would decrease the expense of elections, which could very well offset this expense completely. Any candidate which accepted direct donations would then be guilty of bribery and corruption. Meanwhile, most members of Congress currently spend at least half of every legislative day on the phone and in meetings with industries, corporations, and wealthy donors trying to get donations for their current or next campaign. To get those donations, they make promises and deals which benefit the donors at your expense. While they are seeking such patronage, it is obvious they are not doing the job that they were elected to do, which is to represent you. Such federal campaign funding would allow the more honorable members of Congress and the presidency to spend far more of their time doing what you voted them into office to do. Unfortunately, this would not eliminate political campaign committees, political action committees, PACs, as they are commonly known. that is a more delicate and complex issue. Most PACs are run by industries and corporations, but others are run by social service organizations. The only way to control these, which I can currently see, would be placing limits on their spending, which will not be easy. So I'll have to keep working on that subject. I would push for the creation of an electronic voting system nationwide. There are other nations that already have electronic voting systems where a citizen can vote from their home computer, their work computer, or their cell phone. There is no reason that this country cannot develop such a system. Of course, there are those who will claim such a system would not be secure. I contend the opposite. There are trillions of bank and credit card transactions which occur in this country every year. In spite of media fear-mongering about identity theft, the actual occurrence of false transactions is so rare that it comprises less than 0.001% of electronic financial transactions. An electronic voting system could not be just not just as secure, but it could be more secure than financial transactions. One piece of evidence to consider in this respect is that you would not be at risk of encountering a card skimmer as you risk with credit and debit cards. You would not be at risk of entering your information into a scam website. The risk of identity theft or credit card fraud is more prevalent for several reasons. One is merely the sheer volume of transactions. You may use your credit or debit card numerous times in a single day, where you would use your voter access only once every 2 to 4 years. The other reason is obvious. There would be no monetary benefit to an individual stealing your information. Anyone that did make such an attempt would be facing federal criminal charges and years in prison. This is one nonviolent crime for which I would support prison time. There would be multiple stages of confirmation involved, including you to log in and check your registration status and voting history. If you see your vote has been altered, you could immediately report that change. The exact process is one that would have to be developed, but it's not something which would take long. Development of such a system would be contracted to multiple universities, not corporations, including security testing of any such system before being rolled out. This system would be more secure than the current system we have in place. It would also be less controversial. There would be no chance for claims of boxes of ballots left under tables, no ballots found in ditches on the side of the road, no proprietary, outdated machines owned by a small number of corporations, no hanging chads, no chance for polling locations to run out of ballots, no 6-hour lines at the polls, no closing of polling locations in poor or rural areas, no machines conveniently broken down on election day, no denial of distributing water to voters, no outlawing of driving other voters to the polls. Yes, this is a thing here in the South. This would expand voting access for workers, students, the disabled, the elderly, and anyone with limited transportation. The same system would be used for both early voting and election day voting. This all equates to decreasing the expense of holding elections. Final results would be available within minutes of polls closing. Such a system, once developed, could be shared and used at all levels of government for state and local elections. This would not require additional funding. The same system could be used for everything from your local school board up to federal elections. All right, I propose that citizens be automatically registered to vote when they get any form of driver's license or state ID. You are currently registered for the Selective Service System and for jury duty when you get one of these IDs. So there is no reason at all for this to not be true of voting. It would be updated with each renewal or address change. Next, I am very much in favor of eliminating all laws against anyone with a criminal record being able to vote. These laws only serve to further disenfranchise citizens who typically rightly feel isolated from society. In many cases, this is also a strong form of racism, as minorities are most likely to be impacted by these laws. This is, and always has been, intentional. The U.S. is basically the only developed nation that has such laws. We are not living in the time of Tammany Hall. There are no gangs of criminals threatening and beating people at polling sites today. Combine this with the electronic voting system proposal, and you eliminate that potential almost completely. I am very much in favor of ranked choice voting. While this would be primarily a state decision, one president bringing this to national attention would be a major step toward implementing it nationally. It could be established by congressional legislation. If you don't know how ranked choice voting works, there are lots of articles and videos which do explain it, so look them up, please. While it would be my preference to completely criminalize all corporate and industry lobbying, that is a difficult task to accomplish. Adversaries will use the claim that doing so would be against freedom of speech. This is why I instead have the policy proposal of making all contact between elected officials or their offices completely public and recorded, available without any FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act. All emails, text messages, tweets, phone calls, and meetings with lobbyists or potential lobbyists would have to be made public within 48 hours on that official's website. To expand on this, my proposal would require officials to record the total amount of time spent in contact with lobbyists and spend an equal amount of time for town hall meetings or electronic public discussions. These must be scheduled, announced in advance, and open to all constituents. As you can see, it may be difficult to criminalize lobbying, but it is possible to make any such process transparent, accountable, and so onerous that it is deeply discouraged. Next up would be the establishment of an official electronic system for public referendum. This would include a simple system where all legislation up for congressional vote would be announced publicly in advance, and citizens could be polled or offer feedback on such legislation. Results would be continually updated in real time. Such a system would have to include access for those with disabilities. Results of such public polling would be available after the congressional vote, with that elected official's vote right next to the results of the referendum, the polling. Most likely, it would also include a collective percentage of how many times an official voted with their constituents and how many times they voted against constituents. I am not saying that this would fully determine the outcome of a congressional vote. In some cases, representative democracy is still a better system. It is questionable whether the Voting Rights Act, the Equal Rights Amendment, or the 19th Amendment, the women's right to vote, would have passed in a public referendum. It's questionable. They probably would have, but it's questionable. However, we already know that 99.9% of Americans may support certain legislation, yet many members of Congress will vote in favor of the 0.1%. As a president, I would veto any legislation which did not include a recorded congressional vote. I would send it right back to Congress. You do a recorded vote, then maybe I'll sign it. Another proposal would be to place a time constraint of 5 years after leaving office before any elected official could accept employment with any lobbyist or corporation which contracts with the federal government. If that is not possible, then I would reduce or eliminate all contracts with any company who hired an elected official in less than 5 years after they left office. This would largely close the revolving door between government and industry. I will have to examine more closely if such a rule could be applied to unelected high-ranking officials. There's a lot more which must be taken into consideration to improve what we laughingly call a democracy in this country. I think these proposals are a good starting point. We can have no doubt that any single one of these will meet with intense opposition and claims of being unconstitutional. None of them are unconstitutional. They would make our system more fair, more transparent, more honest. If even one of these proposals were enacted, we would be making positive progress toward an actual democracy. What is mandatory is having a president who is dedicated and committed to making these changes. Just one of these changes may lead to the others being enacted at a later date. So an initial defeat would not be the end of that battle. Just one of these changes would lead to having more candidates having the chance of being elected who would have the same dedication to democracy. In all cases, if we want a true democracy, it is going to take widespread support toward getting there. It is never going to happen by walking into a voting booth once every 2 to 4 years, pulling a lever for the lesser of two evils, and then complaining when nothing changes. It will not happen that way. It will take my dedication and your own. Please share this article or video. Talk about these subjects widely. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help the campaign. If you cannot afford it, then please believe me when I say I understand. You can help by sharing, helping to expand visibility for the campaign. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a good day, and I will catch you in the next one.